Okay, if you clicked on this video, I'm assuming that you're at least familiar with the name 4Kids Entertainment and what that company is all about. Yes, they still exist, by the way, in case you were curious. This might have even been the way that you were first exposed to anime, and don't feel ashamed by that. I mean, a lot of people had the exact same experience, and back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there weren't as many services that exposed anime to a Western audience. And for a little while there, 4Kids was seen as like the king of all of them. So recently I've been looking back at a lot of the properties that 4Kids owned and a lot of the shows that aired, and I just got curious about how did it all start and where did it go wrong and all the weird little things that happened in between. This is going to be the rise and fall of 4Kids Entertainment. Okay, that was way too much of a dramatic intro for this, okay? This is not a documentary on some famous historical figure or some major event from days long past. This is a documentary on 4Kids Entertainment. We could scale it back a bit, alright? Let's just get right into it, though, because there is a lot of crap to cover. Part 1, let's go. Okay then, so the company that would be eventually known to the world as 4Kids Entertainment, for better or for worse, actually had its beginnings in 1970, a lot older than I originally figured the company to be. Back then it was founded as Leisure Concepts LLC by Mike Jermakian and Stan Weston. Out of these two, I mean they're both really big names in the cartoon industry during that era, but out of the two I would probably say Stan Weston is at least more well known. He was the one that came up with the concept of the action figure, so kind of a big deal. It was the G.I. Joe toy line, so he was really connected to that. But Mike Jermakian, reading up on him, he was a really interesting guy as well. He was one of the co-creators of Thundercats alongside Tobin Ted Wolfe. Now, I was not a child of the 80s, unfortunately. I was born in 1993, which means I missed the boat on a lot of these big cartoons. Transformers, He-Man, Thundercats, G.I. Joe. And, man, I sometimes wish I could have been born a little earlier so I could have witnessed those. But even so, I mean, there were reruns of Thundercats on all the freaking time when I was growing up. It was one of my favorite shows. I still had the toys and all that stuff, so it really had a big impact of my childhood. Now, Stan and Mike are no longer with us, unfortunately. Stan passed away recently in 2017. Mike Jermakian passed away in 2001. I actually found this memoriam page for him on one of the Thundercats fan websites. I would give it a read if you're interested in the sort of industry back then. And that's something to go into here about Leisure Concepts, how the whole thing was really started and what it was all about, okay? This was a turning point of cartoons in the 70s and early 80s going into the mid 80s, okay? Before this, I mean, there were a lot of cartoons out there like Hanna-Barbera, all that stuff, but their focus was mostly, you know, just set kids in front of them, give them something wacky and make them laugh. Here are a bunch of wacky animals that are walking around and just getting into hijinks, you know? In the 70s and 80s, this was sort of the turning point where cartoons had a little bit more action, a little bit more of a bite to them, no pun intended when we're talking about Thundercats, and it also was a difference in terms of marketing. A lot of times in the 80s, it was all about toys, and sometimes the toy line would actually be created before the cartoon was created, or rather, let's create a line of action figures and let's make a television show to promote said action figures so kids could go out, or they could make their parents go out and buy all these characters, and let's keep introducing new characters in the show so there's new action figures to buy, and it's just this marketing loop that just makes a whole boatload of money, alright? But yeah, that was the whole original thing of Leisure Concepts. Now, Mike and Stan didn't really have a big part in the whole 4Kids thing, because that did not come until much later into the company. That didn't happen until the 90s when they made that change over. But they were a licensing corporation. Now, I feel like I need to talk about what licensing is just in a general sense here. So here's the definition for you really quick. Licensing is a business arrangement wherein a company authorizes another company by issuing a license to temporarily access its intellectual property rights. Okay, so basically, if a company creates or owns something, and another company wants to use that concept for something that they're doing, there's a procedure in place for that, and that's licensing. They can enter into a contract and be like, hey, we'll pay you this much money for the rights to use this thing that you own, and we'll do this for a year, and then that's the whole, you know, details of the contract would be hammered out there. A good example of this that comes right off the top of my head, this isn't related to Leisure Concepts or anything like that, but remember the game Mike Tyson's Punch-Out on Nintendo. So in this case, it was actually the likeness of Mike Tyson, his name and his appearance, that was licensed by Nintendo to be used for that game. So eventually the license ran out and they had to change the game from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out to just Punch-Out. And the character Mike Tyson in the game was changed to the more, copyright-free Mr. Dream. So it was a pretty influential company back in the day in terms of licensing. At one point it even licensed Nintendo properties like The Legend of Zelda in the United States and even Star Wars properties, okay? Then the 90s happened and then 4Kids happened. So I think that's the reason we're all here. So let's get to that in part 2. Okay, before we even get into the juicy meat of the heart of 4Kids and really what it was all about, okay, I feel like I just need to really cover the name of the company in general. Because it started off as Leisure Concepts, and then 4Kids Entertainment at some point, it changed its name to. And anybody that knows what's going on with the company currently knows that it's called the 4 Licensing Corporation, and then there's a bunch of subsidiaries that are part of that. Oh man, I haven't described to you what a subsidiary is yet. Okay, it's really simple. When a parent company really loves money, it gives birth to a subsidiary company. Alright, does that make sense? Okay. No, subsidiaries are very simple. They're basically referred to as parent and child companies, or maybe a child and a holding company in a lot of respects. Parent companies and holding companies are a little different. Parent companies actually produce something, holding companies kind of don't. They just hold other subsidiaries and then they do the production, okay? Basically think of it like this. Let's say there's a parent company that makes snack foods, and it makes a bunch of snack foods, like we're talking cookies and crackers and those little gummy treats, okay? But then let's say in that company, the one product that really goes crazy successful is the crackers. The crackers this company makes are just, oh, magnifique, okay? So that big parent company that makes all sorts of snacks creates a subsidiary called Crackers Incorporated, let's just call it that, and then that subsidiary, the whole focus of that is just going to be on producing crackers, marketing crackers, thinking up new flavors for crackers. It's all about the crackers, okay? So it's still working under the parent company, the Snack Incorporated, but the cracker company is only focused on that one thing, okay? So let's just go down the timeline of 4Kids here and address how this all shakes down, all right? So we start off in 1970 with Leisure Concepts, okay. Then in 1992, it gave birth to 2 subsidiary companies. We had the Summit Media Group, you've probably never heard of them, don't worry, I'll get to them in a second, and 4Kids Productions. They were created the same year, 1992. Okay, now at this point, the parent company is still referred to as Leisure Concepts, so 4Kids Productions came first as a subsidiary. Then, in 1995, they changed the name from Leisure Concepts to 4Kids Entertainment. So 4Kids Entertainment is the parent company, and 4Kids Productions is the subsidiary. Then later, in 2006, the Summit Media Group goes defunct, and then in 2012, even later, 4Kids Entertainment changes its name to 4 Licensing Corporation, which is what it is right now. Now, going to 4Kids Production, what happened with them? Well, in 2012, they went under a name change as well to 4K Media, and then another one just recently, in 2009, they changed their name to the Konami Cross Media, and they actually are no longer owned by that parent company. 4K Media, upon that name change, was officially owned by Konami at that point, and then recently they just changed their name to Konami Cross Media just to be more clear that they're a subsidiary of Konami, okay? But that's basically how this all works here, okay? Now, before we get into 4Kids Productions, which like I said is sort of like the center of all this stuff, I want to very briefly just talk about the Summit Media Group, okay? The other subsidiary that they created alongside 4Kids Productions, okay? I don't remember this company at all. I don't remember this logo at all. But apparently, in the very early days of a lot of these shows, like Cubics, remember Cubics? It was a weird show. And that show with the electric rats and Yu-Gi-Oh! The Summit Media Group produced the first seasons of those shows before handing them off to 4Kids Productions. And then eventually the Summit Media Group just became defunct. It seemed very clear that 4Kids Entertainment, the parent company, just wanted to focus on 4Kids Productions for a lot of this stuff, so they got rid of the Summit Media Group. By the way, there were other subsidiaries that 4Kids Entertainment created along the way. I'm not going to cover every single one, but these were like the main ones that we're really focusing on today, right? But yeah, the Summit Media Media Group. On top of licensing the first seasons of those anime, they even delved into some live action shows with a game show called Pick Your Brain. I thought that was kind of interesting. And there was also a show that was done in a CG kind of style, sort of like Reboot. And man, this is a massive nostalgia fest for me. But there was a show similar to Reboot with that kind of like more, I mean, at the time it was really advanced CG kind of style. Now it's heavily dated. But it was a show called Vampires. Not vampires, Vanpires. It was a show where you had two groups of robots that could transform into cars and other vehicles. You could see the references, obviously, He-Man here. And you had the Motorvators, which were the good guys, fighting against the Vampires, who were the bad guys. That is the single stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, but it is so awesome, right? That's why I wanted to talk about this. That's the sole reason. I could not pass up bringing vampires to the good public's attention. I don't remember this show at all. I don't know if you remember this show at all. It only lasted one season, unfortunately, but it existed. Oh, and that's not all. Of course, you gotta have really punny names for the characters, like Van Helsing and Tracula and Cardaver. There was a character named Cardaver, and I missed this. Oh, man. Okay, but yeah, that's the Summit Media Group, alright? They mostly handled the first seasons of, like, Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And stuff, and then handed them off to 4Kids Productions, and they had a few other shows they produced, like the Vampire Show and stuff, but I just had to bring that up, okay? They're no longer around. Alright, so with that all being said and done, let's move into 4Kids Productions, okay? Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of this little series that came into fruition in the mid-90s in Japan. There was a video game franchise called Pocket Monsters or something. It was kind of a big deal in Japan, and then it brought over here to America, and it became a freaking phenomenon! You don't understand. Like, if you grew up in the late 90s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Pokemania, huge sensation. If you didn't grow up at that time, well, I'm sorry, you missed the party. You're just gonna have to read about it, I guess. But no, I personally, I've said this before, and I stand by this. Pokemon's massive success in the United States really was like the floodgate for the fact that, you know, anime could be marketable in the United States. I think that really opened a lot of people's eyes here. Like, this animation from Japan came over here, and it's like everybody's losing their crap over it, and be like, yeah, we can make money off this. Now, I'm fully aware there was an anime industry in the United States before Pokemon hit the scene. People bring up Dragon Ball, for example. They're like, oh, well, Dragon Ball was really big too. Yes, of course it was. But you don't understand how big of a phenomenon in the culture Pokemon was. Like, it was huge. Like, you would be watching TV, you would see American commercials with American actors featuring Pokemon in them. You would go to the grocery store and you would see Pokemon cereal and Pokemon Pop-Tarts. By the way, I love those freaking things. Somebody please get me a time machine to 1999 so I can pick those up. And then another one to 2002 so I can get Kellogg's Pop-Tarts snack sticks. Those things were delicious as well. But yeah, you would go driving down the street, you would see a freaking billboard with Pokemon. Pokemon, the first movie, was an anime film that had a wide theatrical release in America in 1999. Do you know how rare that was? Basically, the only one else I can think of off the top of my head that had that big of like a theatrical run was like Akira. Also great film. But, you know, in recent years, a lot of anime films that are released and dubbed into English and are brought over here, they're usually going to only have like a very limited release. It's only recently that I've really been seeing anime films, you know, actually getting the respect they deserve in this regard. In fact, the Dragon Ball movies, the Battle of Gods and Resurrection of F and Broly most recently, those are the ones I'm talking about. But yeah, it was not very common to see anime films brought over here for the United States to view. It's not like back in 1993 you could watch the Broly movie in America on the big screen. It just didn't happen, right? But in 1999 and, you know, 2000 with the next movie and then the next movie after that, Pokemon movies had wide theatrical runs, and I saw every single one in theaters, except for the fourth one. I think by the time we got to the Celebi movie, Pokemon Forever, that had a more limited run in the States. But the first movie was huge, and Pokemania was, like, spreading everywhere. I remember watching an episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with my mom, and they had Pokemon questions on there, so it was all over the zeitgeist, okay? And Pokemon, who is it licensed by? Who brought it over here into the United States for everybody to lose their collective Pika shit over? 4 Kids Productions. They're the ones that did it, okay? And with that right there, that's the thing that made their company, okay? Because, you know, you can't see that happening. You don't know bringing this, like, strange anime with, you know, kids running around collecting animals to fight each other. You don't know that that's going to become, like, a huge phenomenon in your country when you bring it over. All right, you probably could look at the data and you could look at how, like, okay, the anime's doing this good in Japan and there's a lot of merchandising options for this. You know, we can make a lot of figurines and stuff or whatever we need to make, action figures of the Pokemon and all that crap. You know, they realized it would be profitable, but they couldn't foresee what was actually going to happen here, okay? And so this was the thing that really put 4Kids on the map. This was the thing that made them, at the time, the biggest licensing entity in the entire country. This made a big splash in a huge way. And I feel like everything after Pokemon was them attempting just to ride that wave as the wave slowly abated and then eventually just crashed into a wall of spikes. That's a great freaking analogy right there. Not to say everything they did after Pokemon was a horrible failure. Look at Yu-Gi-Oh! That was also really successful. Nowhere near the level of popularity that Pokemon had, but still pretty successful. But yeah, that was the thing that really kicked it off there. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the 4Kids Pokemon dub and what they changed. And really it was the beginning of, like, showing us exactly how they were going to dub anime in the future, the things they were going to change and all that. Now, I think when people bring up 4Kids, the first thing that's going to come into your mind are all the edits they did, all the censorship, all of the Americanization or Westernization or localization or whatever you want to call it, all the changes that they made to these properties, okay? They took Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And One Piece over from Japan, and they just took out the chainsaw and just carved them up until they were mere shadows of their former selves. Okay, so let's talk about this. And I think most people kind of understand how this goes at this point, but just to go over it again, all right. So there's a thing called the FCC. Federal Communications Commission, all right? And in America, there are certain rules of what can and cannot be included for children's programming and to air in this country, okay? Japan has rules as well, but their rules are different from the FCC's rules, obviously, okay? The biggest example I always give with this is that the One Piece anime right now airs in Japan on Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings in the United States, that's like a, you know, like a little kid kind of time slot where I would be watching like Bob the Builder or Dora the Explorer or something, right? But over in Japan during that time slot, you got Nami's boobs bouncing all over the place. There's no way they could have that over here. Way more blood, way more violence, definitely not suited for a Sunday or Saturday morning time slot here in the States, okay? That has nothing to do with 4Kids, all right? That is the rules and regulations set by the FCC. If 4Kids wanted to air these shows in the United States, then they had to change things around. They had to edit out the blood. You can't have Sanji smoking a cigarette, so they changed it to a lollipop. Now, some of the decisions I have to question why they did it the way they did it, but it had to be done one way or the other. They were have to cover up the cleavage in some way, either by just coloring it up with, you know, make it look like skin, or just covering it up with an undershirt or whatever. It had to happen in some way, or else it just simply could not have aired on American television, okay? So that's the one thing I think a lot of people kind of understand at this point. That wasn't all on 4Kids on the way that they had to change things. Like I said, some of the changes they made were a little weird, but it wasn't all on them. The thing that was on them, though, the thing that they didn't have to do, this wasn't anything related to the FCC, this was of 4Kids' own accord, was the westernization, localization kind of thing, where they would change things around in the dub from Japanese terms or Japanese words or references to American references. The obvious example here, the one that I see a bunch of memes about, are the jelly donut thing. I believe that was from the episode of Pokemon where they run into Primeape, if I'm not mistaken. The episode where Brock, he cooks up some delicious jelly donuts for his friends to enjoy, which are, of course, onigiri or rice balls. They don't actually edit the rice balls themselves to make them look like jelly donuts. Brock just calls them jelly donuts. And the explanation that 4Kids gave for this, or at least the explanation that Al Khan, who is the CEO of 4Kids, that's going to be in part 3. We're going to talk about Al Khan. So I'm just going to kind of reference him right now, but we're going to get back to him later. But the way that he talked about it was essentially, we changed things to make them more relatable to a Western audience. That's really important to us. I'm sorry, I'm just confused by that whole thing. I am. I just don't get it. I don't understand why you had to change it from rice ball to jelly donuts, or any other references you had to make. I suppose I don't understand it, because if I was a little kid and Brock said that these were rice balls instead of jelly donuts, I wouldn't have been put off on the show. It seems to me like 4Kids was trying to make it so kids would not be confused, but you're a little kid. I mean, this is the perfect time for you to be confused, so you can learn about stuff, okay? There's so much stuff in the world that you just don't know about. There's so many things, maybe even in your own culture, and of course in other cultures, that you just have no concept of, right? So if I was a little kid, and I saw Brock calling them onigiri, or calling them rice balls, or whatever, that wouldn't have put me off watching Pokemon. That certainly wouldn't have made me so confused. I would have been like, whoa, okay, I don't understand what that is. I would have probably gone to ask my parents what that was, and if they didn't know, I would have probably picked up a book to learn about it if I really wanted to learn about it, if I was that interested in it. If I wasn't that interested in it, then it probably wouldn't have even been a big deal. I would have been watching Pokemon and just been like, oh, I've never heard of that food before. Okay, whatever. I want to see Primeape fight against Pikachu. That's why you're watching it, right? Also, that is kind of weird that they changed the names of those things around, but when you get to the names of the Pokemon, they keep those the same. As in, like, Pikachu, okay? They don't give Pikachu a different name in the 4Kids dub, okay? Pikachu is very clearly a Japanese name, alright? Pika Pika is the onomatopoeia for sparking in Japanese, like, sparking, okay? He's an electric type. And Chu is the onomatopoeia for the sound that a mouse makes in Japanese, okay? So put them together, you get sparking mouse, electric mouse Pikachu, okay? So growing up, I didn't know what a Pikachu was. I didn't know what the name was until later when I looked into the etymology and all that stuff, but that didn't put me off the show. So it seemed like they were like, okay, we can keep these words Japanese, those are fine. And by the way, they did change the names around of a few Pokemon, right? But they kept these names the same. But a rice ball, kids aren't going to have any idea what a rice ball is. We need to make it more familiar to them. I just don't understand that. I mean, maybe, I'm not privy to all the information that 4Kids extrapolated from this. Maybe there were focus groups where they got a bunch of kids together to watch some anime, and they were like, we didn't like the fact that they use these terms instead of these, something that I'm familiar with. I'm not exactly sure how they arrived at this conclusion of westernization, that they just needed to do this sort of thing. It was on them to change certain words to take it away from Japanese culture and changing it into American culture. At the end of the day, these anime are made in Japan. There's going to be references to Japanese culture sometimes that just a light coating of westernization paint is not going to cover up, okay? There's plenty of times that there's characters in Pokemon walking around in kimonos, like traditional Japanese garbs and stuff. If anything, I feel like that would really open up kids to being interested in other cultures, in this instance Japanese culture, but I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing for kids at that young age to see that there's more to the world than their own culture and learn more about it. Not to say that their own culture is not important, but like, hey, I'm watching this cartoon that comes from Japan, and there's all these different references and things to Japanese culture. I'm kind of interested in that. I'm going to read up more at my local library about Japanese culture. I want to learn about rice balls and how you make them. They're actually not that hard to make. I've made rice balls. They actually turned out pretty decent, okay? So yeah, I just don't get the whole westernization thing. It's been made fun of so many times. Al Khan did an interview that we'll be getting into in the third part, all about this kind of stuff, about westernization. He goes into a little bit more detail there. But yeah, that's probably the biggest flack that 4Kids gets. And it started out in Pokemon, and it was kind of a thing that ran through a lot of the other shows that they produced and they licensed over the years. Even going into Yu-Gi-Oh! Like I said with Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, there's so many references into Yu-Gi-Oh! Of characters dying. Like that tag duel that Kaiba and Yugi did against those two masked rare hunter dudes, Loomis and Umbra. If they lost that duel, then a bomb would go off, breaking this skylight, and they would fall to their death in like a 30-story building, okay? And so, of course, in the 4Kids dub, they had to change it to, you will be sucked into the Shadow Realm, or that duel with Yugi and Arcana, where these buzzsaws would chop off their legs, and my god, that is metal. But wait, no, you can't have a cartoon air in America with buzzsaws that slice off characters' legs. That's just not gonna fly in the FCC's backyard, okay? So, now, many of you might be having the next question on your mind of, okay, that's all well and good, they had to change certain things around, but if they knew they had to make these changes, why did they even bother licensing shows like One Piece and Yu-Gi-Oh! That deal with death and have a lot more, violent aspects to them, even more so than Pokemon? Pokemon, they had to change a few things around. Remember that episode where Kaiser took out a gun and pointed it right at a 10-year-old's head? Yeah, then that's not gonna fly, right? But for the most part, even in Japan, Pokemon was marketed at a much younger demographic, at children, okay? So they had to change things over here, but not as much, okay? Then there was the whole Porygon seizure episode, but that's not related to really anything. That's a fluke in animation, if anything else. Although they kicked Porygon to the curb, who was my favorite Pokemon. Never got to see an episode based around him. But anyway, yeah, why did they bring these shows over if they knew they had to change them so much? Money. Yeah, money. They figured, okay, even though we have to make changes, and, kids and even the more hardcore anime fans, they might complain about the changes we made, they still made money off them. I still watch Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! All the time. Even though as a kid, I knew the whole Shadow Realm thing was BS, I still watched the show, and I bought the cards, and I bought the merch all the freaking time. So, I'm sure from 4Kids' perspective, it was like, yeah, we're getting a few complaints about censorship, but we're making way more money, so we might as well just keep them in production and keep on doing what we're doing as long as we can. And that's basically what they did. So, hell, they're a company. They make money, and they were doing a pretty good job at it back then, so make as many changes as you want. Overall, it doesn't seem to really be affecting us all that much, so there. Now, to be fair here, there were some concessions being made to try to have an uncut version of the shows that they were dubbing, the ones that were airing on American television. There were talks of making uncut versions, still English dub, but uncut versions that retained the original music, that had, same lines as the Japanese, not changing the lines around to be more kid-friendly. 4Kids introduced a lot of really lame, stale, punny humor into these shows, but there were uncut versions apparently that were going to be released. So, as far as I know, at least with Yu-Gi-Oh!, there were some of these uncut episodes released. I've watched them, and they're actually pretty good. Same voice cast. Dan Green still voices Yugi in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Dub and everything like that. Same voice actors for Joey and Weevil and Tristan and all those characters, except they just keep the lines of the script more closely to the Japanese. The original soundtrack is there, like Passionate Duelist. The original theme song is there, not the English dub 4Kids version of it. It's time to duel. Although that was actually a pretty good theme song. 4Kids theme song with Time to Duel, that got you hyped, okay? So they existed, but they only made 9 episodes. I'll leave a link below to the episodes where I watched them anyway, if you want to check them out for yourself. I just think that it was not as profitable for 4Kids, which is why they stopped it. I think they were going to try to market to older kids a little bit. They even had another subsidiary called Foresight Licensing Solutions, okay? This was basically a subsidiary trying to get a little bit older or like tweeny age kids into the 4Kids properties. Sort of like how McDonald's at a certain point did the Mighty Kids meal. If you were a kid between like the ages of 10 to 13, you would order a Mighty Kids meal. And I remember always getting those, right? So that was for licensing, trying to do an older audience, and they were trying to make concessions with the uncut versions. But I at least know the Yu-Gi-Oh! Uncut versions existed. So they at least tried for a little while. They got 3 volumes, 9 episodes deep into this, And at that point, they probably got to the realization that's like, this is not profitable for us, so we're just going to keep on doing our regular dubbed version of it with all the jokes and all the changes and edits and westernization that's going to air on American television, and we're going to kind of scrap the whole uncut version plan that we had, just because it wasn't making enough money for them. So that brings one more thing that I want to talk about in this section before we move on, and that's, of course, One Piece. Look at Luffy's face. That is horrifying. He's just like, yeah, how you guys doing? You want to join my crew? Want to be my Nakama? Okay. Yeah, I think if any of, if like Lucci or Horty or Doflamingo saw that face, I think they would just give up immediately. That is horrifying, Luffy. But, okay, so One Piece was announced that, 4Kids was going to pick it up. This was in 2004. The 4Kids dub of One Piece that we all know so much about, because I did a whole series where I was reviewing and watching episodes about it. That started to air in 2005. Okay, now, there were a lot of rumors swirling around exactly why. Why did this exist? Why did One Piece end up in the hands of 4Kids of all things? Because you'd figure they would have to at least watch a little bit of the show to understand what it's about and the things they would have to change. I'm not saying they would make somebody sit down and watch every single episode of One Piece at the time before they decided to license it. That's kind of absurd. But just by watching the first few episodes of the show, you can understand, like, hey, there's a character holding a gun to another character's head. That doesn't look like something we could air. Hey, there's also a lot of blood and boobs in this show. I wonder, we're gonna have to change a lot of stuff to make this work for the FCC regulations. So why did they go ahead and take it? Well, the rumor that I had heard, and other people have talked about this for years, I've always heard that there was a deal, kind of like a contract, where they didn't select One Piece particularly. They had to take One Piece along with another anime property. Most people assumed that it was Shaman King. So kind of the deal was like, all right, we'll give you Shaman King to license in English dub, but you also have to take One Piece instead. All right, there's a problem with this, and the problem is that both Shaman King and One Piece were owned by different companies. One Piece, of course, is owned by Toei, and Shaman King was owned by Zebek. Zekbek. They were owned by different companies, okay? So that doesn't make much sense to purchase Shaman King and One Piece like they were required to take both of them together as like a package deal. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. There were other rumors I heard swirling around that Funimation was originally going to get the rights to One Piece. Funimation existed in the 90s as well, along the same time as 4Kids. So they were going to get the rights to One Piece, but then 4Kids offered Toei like a better deal or a better contract. They kind of went behind Funimation's back. Keep in mind, this is all rumor I'm talking about here. I don't know any of this stuff concretely. And so that's how One Piece ended up in the hands of 4Kids. Looking around on the internet, I see a lot of rumors, a lot of opinions, a lot of ideas, nothing concrete. I've never seen an interview with Al Khan, who was the CEO of 4Kids at this time, where he directly mentions how they acquired One Piece. I know when they announced that was in April of 2004 when they announced that, yeah, One Piece is going to be part of our lineup. But yeah, nothing else concrete in terms of how they acquired it. So maybe they did have to take it in, with a bunch of other anime as sort of like a package thing, and they just got stuck with it. But at any rate, they got their hands on it. So yeah, man, if you just want a better example of a series that 4Kids licensed or produced, and there was a lot of them over the years, trust me. If you want a better example of a series that was just mangled and twisted to the point where it didn't even really resemble its original property anymore, I think One Piece is the apex. And it goes well beyond just, adding in the really lame jokes and the puns and changing the characters' names to like, Portgas D. Trace or Chaser or freaking Zolo. That's the one that made the most sense because even Viz had to do that. But you understand, it goes well beyond that. They deleted whole entire arcs from the story, creating massive plot holes along the way. Reverse Mountain doesn't happen. Laboon, Crocus, they don't exist. They completely got rid of Little Garden for some reason, so the introduction of giants, that's out of the window. So, yeah. Now, by the way, the reason why they skipped the arcs, nobody really has any good idea. The best idea that I've heard is the reason they skipped Little Garden was to get to Drum Island faster and profit off of Chopper and make all a bunch of Chopper merchandise, because, you know, he is a marketing darling. But I don't know if that's true or not. That was just a rumor I heard a long time ago. Like, I like to think there was a real reason for them to do it. I don't think that 4Kids, like, they were just sitting around a table, like, let's skip arcs for no reason. I'm sure there was a reason, even if it wasn't a great reason. But as it stands, yeah, the plot of One Piece is supremely train-wrecked when the way 4Kids handle it. So, yeah, but that's One Piece. I did a whole series on that where I went into detail pretty much about everything involving 4Kids and the voice actors and how they change things, and you could go check that series out on the vlog channel. But yeah, so moving on to the next part, I think I'm going to break this up into 2 videos because this is very long. Next time we're going to talk about Al Khan, who was the CEO of 4Kids during the time of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, like when the company was in its heyday. And then we're going to talk about the eventual fall of 4Kids and what happened with its bankruptcy and its lawsuit with Yu-Gi-Oh!, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. There was an issue there with them not paying royalties. We'll go into all that stuff in the next part. Thanks for watching, everybody. Tekking101 signing out. Hey everybody, how you doing? End screen Tekking here. Thanks for watching the video. I appreciate it if you got to this point. This is something I've been working on the last, like, week or so. I had to give myself basically a crash course in 4Kids and all these names and business terminology and everything. So, for that reason, this is not normally what I talk about. I feel like I probably got some stuff wrong along the way. So if I missed anything major or if I just got something catastrophically wrong, please let me know and I will correct myself in the second part of this video, which will be on Al Khan and then the descent of 4Kids into bankruptcy and where it's at right now. I also want to talk about a bunch of other series that I missed out in this video, like Chaotic. That was a really good show, and I remember that growing up, so I'm probably going to bring up other shows like that in the next part. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for watching. Tekking signing out.